I don't know why it's showing the other one. I don't know why it's sharing this. I want to share this one, but it's not sharing this one.
Oh,
It's very strange.
maybe you need to close
The other one.
Yeah. Maybe open it when the control is not.
Hmm.
Close it.
Okay. All right, so let's start. The conference is being recorded. Wait a minute.
蛮高的，对不对？是蛮高的，就遮脸盘。
I need to mute everybody. Yes.
Yes, you should be able to. No, just mute everyone.
Mute all.
Yes,
Okay.
mute all.
Good. Yes, they can. Okay, so we can start, and Dean Li Xiangning from Tongji University will address the conference now. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm very happy and honored to be here to, on behalf of the College of Architecture and Planning of Tongji University, to host this year's conference, the SICA conference. Wilfred, I remember last time the conference was hosted by TULC. That which year was that? 2 years.
2 years ago.
So I wanted to say, after COVID, everybody was used to the kind of the online, offline kind of mixture of format of a conference. That's which is good. And also, I wanted to say thank you to Luis Loebras, who's not here yet, and Wilfred and Ginger, the Bobby Mushino, and Brian Asma, Jasmine Schneller, David Barron, and Juan Shu, well, and among many others, and the presenters of papers. Tongji is very happy to host this again. Host this event. Probably you know that Tongji has a pretty long history with SICA. We are one of our distinguished professor, Luo Xiaowei, among many others. I think there are a couple Chinese members for SICA since its founding in the 60s. Luo Xiaowei, Tongji, and Lu Kaiqu are the earlier the earliest 3 members from China. All of them are prestigious kind of architectural critic and representing part of history. And also Sika was doing with the UIA conference at Beijing and published a series of books called Architectural Mosaic, right, of the word architecture. So also the second thing I wanted to say is the role of architectural criticism today, at this critical moment when globalization is at this stage and also falling apart. And architectural culture should either, I think, listen to capital consumption that infiltrate through every aspect of the society today. Not all of the classical models of the heroes like Le Corbusier, Louis Kahn. Which path are we going to take? And also architecture, how should architecture to build something for the poor, the disadvantaged group of people, and also to generate and to respond to generate the shelters for them, and also to respond to the challenges of climate change and issues of sustainability. How to evaluate and how to rethink all those issues. I think it's the most critical role of architectural criticism today. The third thing I wanted to say is that since the founding of Sika in the 70s, 1970s, last century, architectural criticism has gone through ups and downs, and architects does not care too much about criticism as much as they do. There's one very wonderful Spanish architecture magazine, which is called Peace. But as I said, although there are wonderful writings about architecture and reviews in front of at the first session of every issues, but the architects don't read them. They only read images. To some extent, become a pornography of architects. So I think that architecture is still producing this topic of this year's conference. Very good. It's a good topic to bridge the divide between practice and criticism. Yes, architecture should and must be taken as building criticism. I think it will be proved also in the presentations later by Anand Palasma and Wang Xu as well. Another Chinese speaker, I think he's now the one. I think he's a very good writer about architecture, criticism and theory and history. He translated also a lot of English literature on architecture, history, theory, and criticism into Chinese. As tomorrow in the morning, there's a session of the launch of the book that he translated for Louis. I think that in his case, he's not only writing architecture, but also practicing. He designed buildings, but he's going to talk about architecture, talking about traditional Chinese gardens as a reference to contemporary architecture practices in today. But also these architecture, not only as buildings only, but also they could be taken as built criticism, which is very important these days. So the last word would go to thanks to Wilfred Wong, who has, without his countless effort being put into this, this effort this event won't happen. And also I want also to convey the sincere thanks to other people here and Mo Wanli and the speakers and also the audience. Thank you very much for coming to Tongji to join this wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean Li Xiangning. Actually, I admit I'm floundering a little bit because I believe we have everything sorted out technically in terms of how things should run. All the same, let me also echo the welcome and the thanks in the name of Louise Noel, who would like to have been here, but she's been prevented from joining us. I would like to add my thanks to the School of Architecture, the College of Architecture and Urban Planning here at Tongji University, and especially the dean who invited us to join the school and to hold the third conference in the series, which we started 2 years ago, as Dean Lee mentioned. I also wanted to thank Professor Mo Wan Lee, who has been a key supporter and organizer of this event. We have made every effort to organize this as an international meeting, and so we're incredibly grateful to Tosin Oshinowo to join us from Lagos, in Nigeria, and for David Barragan to have flown over from Ecuador to join us here in Shanghai, and for Yasmin Sharif to have come from all the way from London. Curiously, the technology has allowed us to invite Juhani Pallasmaa, whose health has not allowed him to travel, but who we're very grateful to is joining us this evening or this afternoon, all the same with the help of this technology. And somewhat ironically, Wang Shu, who has this week actually flown over to Europe, but who will be joining this conference from Europe on using the online technology. So 4 different continents have been joined by this technology. Some of the speakers are here in person. Louise's welcome notes, and she would have been here as the chair of the session. She joins us with these welcoming words. On the occasion of the 2023 International Conference on Architecture as Built Criticism, she would have liked to have been here to welcome Professors Jin Chuye and Juhani Pallasmaa, but she will be watching this presentation later on when we have recorded it on YouTube. She also welcomes Tosin Oshinowo, Mariana Wilderom, and Luis Recaman and Ricardo Leitão, who will be presenting keynote lectures and papers in the next couple of hours. Louise, same way as Dean Lee, thinks that this topic is a particularly important one, not only because criticism as a profession is severely under strain, but because we typically associate, as Louise Noel says, criticism with the act of writing. But criticism doesn't only come out through the act of writing, it also comes out through the act of building. And that is actually also the title of Wang Shu's lecture, Construction as Criticism, but we will talk about that tomorrow. Louise points out that the modern movement itself was, of course, a movement, a critical movement against the kind of housing that was rife in industrialized Europe and elsewhere, that was producing uninhabitable environments. And so the modern movement as a movement was destined to become a critique of a way of urban design and architecture. So you could say that that was kind of a broad critical movement. But beyond that, of course, each building as a design proposal is in itself also a critique. So Louise points out that Adolf Loos was a pioneer in the process of cleaning up the act, so to speak, thinking about what the meaning is of architectural language and how that architectural language should be abstracted and essentialized. So we are all looking forward to the presentations by Professor Jin Chuye, who is going to speak about the important origins of in the tradition of Chinese landscape design and architecture in contemporary Chinese architecture. And Johanni Palasma, with his long-standing interest in the non-industrialized, non-mechanical tradition of modern architecture, is visiting the Villa Mairea by Alvar Aalto to remind us of how Aalto used a piece of architecture as an exploration, how architecture can be other than just simply a machine for living in, to use that kind of phrase. And Johanni will reflect on both the writings as well as the building to form a synthesis as to how architecture, in this case, the Villa Mairea, is a built criticism based on an ethical reading of culture. We will hear from Tosin Oshino how she takes a kind of a critique in the same manner as the modern movement, but from an African perspective, as to what effect globalizations had on the global South, and how the response needs to change in the global South to these kinds of influences and these kinds of pressures. Mariana Wilderom and Luis Reckermann will look at a particular school and show us how that school, as a single building, is exploring the poetics of architecture as different from the kind of rationalist construction that we see otherwise. The other short paper is by Ricardo Leitão from Portugal, who is juxtaposing his analysis of Giorgio Grassi's bank in Florence, which Grassi has used as an explicit critique of Leon Crier's urban planning. And he's going to show us how Giorgio Grassi actually uses architecture in a very pointed way to show up the shortcomings of his colleague and his, well, initially a colleague with whom he fought in the same direction, but ultimately differentiated himself from that position. So with these introductory remarks, let me welcome Professor Jin Chuyi, who's Professor of Architecture at Beijing University of Civil Engineering and Architecture. He was an MIT research scholar and received a PhD from Tsinghua University, is a SICA member and a member of the Architectural Society of China. As a professor of architecture at Beijing University, he's also an architect in practice, a scholar, and a critic. He's the head of his practice called Jin Architect Studio. His research fields include translation of a Chinese traditional design language into modern architecture, which is basically the foundation of his lecture, and contemporary architectural thoughts and criticism in China. He's the author of more than 10 academic books, including Four Houses, A House is Also a Garden, and Foreign Body Sensation. And he's in charge of the editorial work of serial publications such as Arcadia, Painting and Garden, and Readers on Chinese Architecture and Criticism. He also translated a number of books, over 30 architectural theory books, including Transparency and Luis Barragan, The Search and creativity. His design works include the Wind Age Art Center, 75, Folding House, and Hexagonal Court. Please welcome Professor Jin. Do you want to me to present or? Yeah. Yeah, I will just set him up. We just make full screen? No, we can only make one screen. Just a second. Okay. I don't know how to get rid of this. So, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad and so honored to be invited to this conference. Okay, I use this microphone. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad and so honored to be invited to this conference. And the name of my lecture is Sound of Silence, Chinese Architect Rediscovering Classical Gardens. The Dao De Jing teaches the greatest sound is silence. This implies the most powerful ideas don't need words. And I think form is a language of its own, often more direct than written criticism, like architecture critics. In a world filled with theories, embracing formal language might be a way to break through. Any honest architecture embodies the architect's comprehensive judgment on the discipline's history, local environment, practical constraints, and human conditions. It inevitably involved a critical dimension. In context of China, the disconnection from Asian architecture tradition and the serious problem brought about by modernization manifest as a lack of architectural formal languages. Over the past 20 decades, Chinese architects have sought answer within tradition, re-evaluating the modern relevant. Re-evaluating the modern relevance of classical Chinese gardens and engaging in a series of interpretation and translations. Contemporary garden architecture, I name it as garden architecture in China, is not landscape architecture, nor the study of architecture within gardens. Garden architecture is a unique academic consensus and practice focused on classical Chinese gardens. It combines theories, methods, and research of modern architecture to explore the universal value of classical gardens. It also involves integrating the ideas of garden living and the creative themes into modern architecture. The first example is Wang Shu, and the keywords is Shanshui and differences. Wang Shu's design are based on thoughtful look at Chinese condition, especially gardens and Shanshui paintings. He thinks buildings should be like a mountain, and the Shanshui paintings. It's curved and non-linear folded exteriors and deep interiors, endless stretching and offering different views at different points. This gave the architecture richness and romantic forms, much like a natural mountain. Wang Shu's goal is not to create a mountain-like building, but rather a world filled with differences. This concept arises from typology, describing internal feature of human settlement or forms in nature, just like forest, similar in many ways, yet different everywhere. He thinks it's important not to make things too simple or too abstract. Instead, the building should connect to our real experience. His design is based on a thoughtful look at tree. No. We can see 10 pictures. It's from his building, National Archives of Publication in Hangzhou. Wang Shu explores a rich, diverse typology to compensate for the absence of body in modern architecture. We can see when we walk through the building, the scenery is ever changing. He used ways of seeing to trieve a vision of Shanshui and nature narratives, believing that method of gardening served as a medium of transformation between Shanshui painting and modern architecture. Wang Shu's realization of Shanshui world is to create difference. His architecture is a critique of uniform and modernization, standardization. And the second one, I think, is Dong Yugan. And the keyword is courtyard and body. Dong Yugan explores a type of courtyard garden architecture closely linked to living. It's known that Chinese living space have moved far away from the nature, but don't try to bring back life centered around courtyard, but also follow the path of Asian gardeners. He creates layers and depth in confined space to evoke feeling of remoteness. His design emphasizes body experience. Walking through it, your senses are constantly activated. With frequent changes in direction and scenery, it's rich with feelings and emotions, just like in the garden. Almost every visible spot is accessible, with endless exploration and a touch of poetry. Dong also deeply study the spatial features of Chinese gardens, and he thus creating an open design approach. Like Asian gardeners, he used man-made elements as well as natural features like stone and trees. He intertwined these various elements, giving the architecture a very new look, very complex, and just like old Chinese poems. In a feature called Xishanting, just as the picture shows, about 80% of it is modern architecture. You look it just like a garden, but no, it's modern architecture. But due to the inclusion of natural elements like trees and stones, it evokes mountainous feeling. And the third one, I want to introduce Liu Jiakun, and the keywords is nature force and borrowing. Liu Jiakun is good at dealing with reality. His Xichun courtyard, just as shown, is a mix of daily life, flea market, sport area, working space, bamboos and ponds, all put into a big modern concrete building, a complex. It's a meeting of old and new, where delicacy and roughness coexist. It's a special kind of city place that rooted in its earth. Liu's approach is similar to the core idea in classical Chinese gardening, is to borrow. In Chinese, 引介, to borrow, or to utilize the situation, whether good or bad. When things don't go as planned, instead of fighting against them, people should go with the force, making the best use of opportunities. The goal of design is to work with nature's force of reality, showing strength and following trends, becoming a part of the ongoing flow of time and space. Architecture and nature are not in hierarchical or antagonistic relationship. They neither harm nor protect each other, but rather they dance together in harmony. in the same force, revealing each other. So you can see picture is drawn by Li Cheng, Shang Dynasty painter. And you can see there are something in common with these two pictures. The name of this project is Dongxian Bieyuan. It's a good example to understand Liu Jiakun. Nestled between high mountains and a big river, it used a series of cluttered buildings to adapt to the terrain. It created the illusion of overhanging eaves, emphasizing the contours of the landscape. Simply weather still, the red one is weather still. It's used to depict a soaring form. While concrete and stone forms a sturdy foundation. Through the contrast of land and highway elements, it paid tribute to Shang Dynasty Shanshui painting, showing a remarkable romantic spirit. Other architects like Li Xinggang, Liu Yichun, Zhu Xiaofeng, Wang Xin, and Wang Baozhen are also studying the classical Chinese gardens in their own ways. While enriching the language of modern architecture, they are also providing in-depth response to the common challenges of the modern time. From a contemporary perspective, Chinese garden possess rich physical skills and extremely high spatial density, emphasizing good method based on borrowing and following the natural flow. They form complex systems comprising artificial and natural elements. The asymmetrical layout and decentralized form represent the pursuit of spiritual freedom. The Chinese architectural community have continuously studied classical gardens in the last century. But what's different between garden and modern architecture languages hinder direct application and appreciation. Chinese architects are facing a modern world that feel very linear, smooth, and lack of nature touches and subtle experience. In last 20 years, they use idea from gardens and paintings, using their imagination and modern architecture language. We're also considering local building conditions, mixing memories with new creations. This building may not be a direct link to the past, but they carry a sense of romance and human connection to the modern area, sometimes lack. The form provides a genuine critique of rationalism, and they say a lot without even a word. That's all, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jin. We do have some time to ask questions, even though we started late. I think we would like to offer the possibilities to the participants to raise their hands and to ask questions if you would like, or members here in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, please do so. Raise your hands and we'll provide you the microphone. There's a short question and answer session. So if you want to ask questions. Okay, no pressing questions. I don't see any raised hands. Then if there are no questions, then we will move to the next keynote presentation, which is by Tosin Oshinowo. Tosin Oshinowo is an architect based in Lagos, Nigeria, and she is the this year's curator for the Sharjah Architecture Biennale. Tosin Oshinowo is the founder and principal of Oshinowo Studio, which she founded in 2013, and which has worked on a number of civic, commercial, and residential projects throughout Nigeria. She's renowned for her insights into socially responsive approaches to architecture, design, and urbanism. Oshinowo's key designs include a project with the United Nations Development Program to build an entirely new community in northern Nigeria for a village displaced by Boko Haram, and the Maryland Mall in Lagos. Her work spans into the conceptual sphere, demonstrating a strong interest in architectural history, while embodying a contemporary perspective on the next generation of African design, innovation, and Afro-minimalism. I'm very interested in that term. She partnered with Lexus on conceptual design explorations for Design Miami 2020 and co-curated the second Lagos Biennale in 2019. Oshinowo is a registered architect in the Federal Republic of Nigeria and a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Before founding her own office, she worked in the offices of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in London and OMA in Rotterdam, where she was part of the team that designed the fourth mainland bridge proposal in 2008. On returning to Lagos, she practiced at James Cubitt Architects and led on notable projects, including the corporate head office building for Nigeria LNG in Port Harcourt. She has a Bachelor of Architecture from Kingston University in London and an MSc in Development Planning, Building, Urban Design and Development from University College London, an AA diploma from the Architectural Association, and a master's in Business for Architecture and Design from IE University in Madrid. Welcome, Tosin Oshinowo.
Thank you so much. And I'm very honored to present a paper here today. Sorry, just one moment. I end my curatorialship for the second Sharjah Architecture Triennial. I reflect on the narratives drawn. The beauty of impermanence, an architecture of adaptability, is a metaphor that draws attention to the built environment's design and technological innovations visible in the Global South. These solutions are born out of conditions of scarcity, that is to say, working within the limitations of the natural resources available. And here, I find myself drawing new narratives from this positioning. In contrast, the last 400 years has seen the Global North exercise an approach to scarcity through cornucopianism. Cornucopianism is a principle in economics that stems from the optimism that our natural resources, though limited, can be extended infinitely. The Global North, through land conquest, slavery, resource extraction, and technological advancement, all supported by mythological and religious beliefs, have encouraged the positioning that humanity has infinitely been ordained to multiply with dominion over all things. This journey started as a quest from childhood experience to find meaning in the deep-rooted challenges of self-organizing systems from my immediate experiences of growing up in 1980s Lagos. Lagos was the capital of the colony and protectorate of Nigeria, established in 1914. However, we had already had a long interaction in the 1800s with the British through the Royal Niger Company. In 1976, the decision was made to move the capital of Nigeria to Abuja, a more geographically centered location of the country. And in 1991, this position was formalized. By then, Lagos had been crippled under oversubscription and population increase. By the 1980s, the progressive infrastructure development of the 1970s had stalled. and like much of Africa, independence prosperity had failed to live up to the promise. Regional infrastructure development had continued to encourage rural to urban migration without upgrading city infrastructure to sustain this evolving densification. The post-colonial African city, a proposed model of progress, crippled under the weight of the post-colonial state. Scarcity, once regarded primarily as a pre-industrial condition, was now the basis of existence. The 1990s and noughties saw self-propagating bottom-up initiatives come to the foreground as a coping mechanism towards existence and modernity. This is Oshodi in Lagos from the 1990s. A naturally occurring geographical convergence point, it originated as a market during the slave trade and remained a prominent intersection for vehicle and train movement. Oshodi is also famous for its informal market, which grows and recedes daily with the intensity of people moving. It is also a major access route that connects the Oni airport in the city. By the 1990s, autonomous self-organizing networks and structures had almost crippled this transient function. These challenges call to action interventions by the state to modernize the node. Lagos has since progressed from this positioning due to policy initiatives from continuous state administration. However, in this progress, sadly, a uniqueness has been lost. Oshodi still struggles with the complexities of an organizing system for a dense post-colonial African city. This is also bearing in mind the implementation of this initiative that was not well suited to the structures and the cultures that it must now accommodate. This is the ultra-modern Oshodi bus terminal that replaces the natural intersection. Since completion in 2019, the facility has not been fully commissioned, as the wider transport network infrastructure required to sustain this intervention has been slow to be implemented. Oshodi is a fascinating place, and the principles here form part of the inspiration for the triennial edition. The second edition of the Sharjah Architecture Triennial opens on the 11th of November, 2023, and is the body of work of 29 participants from 26 countries. These participants explore what happens when we more consciously and empathetically provide solutions to our built environment. I look forward to the opening of this exhibition and opening up this discourse around how we live and how we can build better in balance with our environment. Coming back to Lagos, in these situations, conditions of scarcity, innovative autonomous design finds itself almost like a calling from ancestors on how to move things forward. One of the triennial's participants, Nifemi Bello-Marcus' project, A Designer's Utopia, has been cataloging this collective contemporary knowledge with products brought about by socioeconomic conditions. These communities, through open source and collaboratory approaches, create contextual solutions to solve contextual issues within their communities. And it raises the question, what does it mean to work within limits and the proximity of materiality? The work of these practices explore and encourage empathetic initiatives that promote social sustainability, a consciousness of materiality, and a respectful acknowledgement of the environment. These can also be great propagators of climate-conducive initiatives. But when we speak of architecture, we speak of the architect, a dictation brought about by experience and training that encourages a narrative, and in many cases, an aesthetic language. How do we address the implication of this narrative? The Roman architect and engineer Pollio identified three principles necessary for well-designed buildings. Firmitas, which has to do with its durability and its structural integrity, the ensuring a building is in good condition. Ulitas, its ability to function appropriately for its end users. And Venuitas, which deals with its beauty and the delight and the experience of people using the building. But what does this mean for architects and designers when we leave our commissions for end users? One of the triennial participants, the Art and Cultural Development Foundation of the Republic of Uzbekistan's exhibit, sets a brilliant case to support this argument. Can modernism be seen to be a set of historical styles informed by local traditions rather than a unified global-oriented trend? What can we learn from the specific example of the modernist architecture introduced by a centralized program of Soviet urban development on a territory that had an entirely different aesthetic experience? The exhibit highlights 3 projects designed and built in the post-war modernism era. Their research has documented the aesthetic adaptations implemented on the buildings over the years. The architectural heritage of Uzbekistan showcases a blend of Persian, Islamic, and Central Asian influences brought together and enriched by the Silk Road. Modern architecture from the Soviet era proposed a language of forms and materials that aim to communicate ideas of progress and renewal, seemingly applicable across places and cultural contexts. What does this adaptation mean for the top-down approach of the architect? These designers have strong nationalist and modernist statements, celebratory of materiality and tectonics, built-in materials that are exemplary for the technologies of the modern day, and in this case, concrete. Completely detaching itself from the contextuality of place, but converging a nationalist identity to which all citizens should build allegiance. But when buildings are adapted to take on another narrative, what does this say about our intentions through our architecture? There are many examples of similar situations across the African continent, where nationalist structures have been aesthetically adapted over time. What does this say about our approach as architects to building aesthetics? What can we learn from the balance between tradition and modern in the past decades? What influences and causes these shifts and the materials used to produce them? What does it mean in relation to the social constructs surrounding them? What can we learn from these modernist structures when they're in a liminal state? Limbo Accra, another participant for the triennial, has their practice emerged from research, interdisciplinary engagement, and experimentation with the aesthetics and cultural significance of unfinished decaying concrete structures in West African cities. As many buildings are adapted aesthetically, there are many that are in a state of liminal. For the triennial, Limbo Accra will occupy the Sharjah Mall, with its estimated 65,000 square meters of retail, entertainment, culinary space. The Sharjah Mall is one of the largest uncompleted projects in the Emirate. Limbo Accra's practice draws attention to the liminality of large-scale projects. Far from the intended programs, the buildings have an autonomy of occupation and adaptability. And here they create an alternativity of use that resembles more likely a more humanistic narrative than the intended grandeur of their propagators. The 2019 Lagos Biennial, which I co-created, is of a similar strain, occupying 4 floors of the 25-floor abandoned Independence House in Lagos Island. The building edifice was gifted to Nigeria by the British as a goodwill support towards independence in the 1960s. And in 1993, portions of it caught fire, and since this incident, the building has been left in a state of disrepair. Titled, How to Build a Lagoon Just from a Bottle of Wine, The biennial brought together artworks and architectural projects of 42 individuals and collectives working in a range of mediums. Inspired by the writings of a Nigerian poet, Akim Lasisi, the title speaks partly to how societies, especially in the global South, are able to mobilize vernacular knowledge and skills in order to realize meaningful, ambitious, creative, and social projects despite inadequate economic resource and state support. Our occupation of the building was only made possible by the squatters, many recent migrants to the city. Though initially cautious, our interactions brought the realization that we had common goals of coexisting, living together in ways that were mutually beneficial and productive. One of the many residents in the site who was instrumental in our success was Mr. Ben Abuzi, who we hired to assist in cleaning, painting, and securing the location. Mr. Abuzi is from a neighboring country, Benin. He speaks fluent English, French, and Yoruba, and is a trained painter. He also became our link to the wider community of residents in and near the building. In between the numerous challenges of delivering an event unfamiliar with its host environment, the many volunteers who offered their time did so for the opportunity to lend their voice to a positive cause. Thomas Heatherwick has an equally interesting argument on the importance of emotion as a design requirement for buildings. Unlike the premise of the triennial, which amplifies the materiality of context, Heatherwick raises the importance of materiality and contextuality in the creation of place and the importance this has in the conscious and the subconscious emotion of well-being of people. Heatherwick supports this argument of soulful building through a series of design elements. In particular, he draws attention to the importance of curvaceous structures, in stark contrast to the brutalist structures of the modernist era. Building with earth colors and an emphasis on natural materials such as wood. These are elements not far from many of our more traditional architectures that contextualize place. However, Heatherwick operates with a global narrative, creating unified understanding of design. Still, I'm drawn to this argument because it also supports the rationale concerning contextuality. And here, I relate this to my experience of designing a resettlement town for a community in northern Nigeria displaced by the insurgency Boko Haram. Here, color was an important contextualizing and localizing part of the intervention. At one of my early meetings with the community, I asked the community head what color preferences they had for their homes. Color plays an essential role in our experience of space. As we sat under a neem tree, he pointed to a color on a wall, which is locally known as Abuja brown. In my research regarding traditional technologies, I realized that this was the color of the traditional walls using the local earth, and in fact, the expectation the community yearned for was the familiar. In this project, no paint was used to render the exterior. We achieved this color and contextual and textured render through a series of combination of the local soil sourced from down the road, cement, and an active bonding agent. The long-term goal of this intervention was to foster development for a community, provide a sustainable platform for economic growth, and most importantly, give people dignity by offering homes that provided members of the community cause to be house proud. And this takes me back to my reflections from the triennial and the importance of contextuality of place. My curatorial interests and practice are rooted in concerns around cultural and contextual representation in architecture and the questioning of what is an African building. This research has led to my positioning that the duality of a building's materiality is dependent on its location, and its locality is equally dependent on its materiality. That is to say, Its context is determined by its tectonics, coupled and composed through social norms and daily practice. And it is this coupling in turn that creates a visual identity and aesthetic. Take, for example, this illustration of the Great Benin Kingdom from 1180 to 1897. It's an excellent example of how most land movement pre-industrialization was experienced on foot. With services and supplies concentrated in the center of cities, the developmental radius from the heart of a city was limited to about a mile, which is about the walking distance of a person for 30 minutes. This meant that most of the materials used for building, irrespective of the location, would have been locally sourced. In modernity, how do we encourage innovation contextuality through building materiality? And with this in mind, how can we retain cultural relevance of place and identity? How can we relate contextual materiality towards a requirement of our industrialized world's need for speed and scale? See here a series of images taken in the 1970s of a palace in Kano, applying the final layer of waterproof plaster called Makuba to the walls. This contextuality has a natural cycle of life, like the human body, a process of replenishment and renewal. Pre-industrialization, innovations occurred in contextual materiality, creating architecture with an identity and cultural relevance. How do we address and reflect these principles today in our ever-globalized modern world? In modernity, how do we encourage innovation contextually through building materiality? And with this in mind, how can we retain a cultural relevance of place and identity? Take, for example, the Republic of Uzbekistan's exhibit and how it depicts a building that has been transformed in the age of modernity. What lessons can we learn from these autonomous self-organizing systems that work within the limitations of natural resources available? Can these systems be scaled to address identification and potentially curb carbonization and in turn planetary scarcity? Several of the participants for the triennial eloquently practiced the principle of renewed contextual that pays homage to the pre-industrialized societies that were in better balance with the natural world. These principles rethink tradition and holistically engage with the concept of upcycling and recycling, and where possible, they champion the reuse of materials and posit gentler versions of modernity. Another participant, Alborde, a practice from Ecuador, promotes local development, social innovation, and sustainability in their projects. Globalization affords us a context where everything is within reach, easily acquired from anywhere, and fueled by the capitalist development processes that have eroded local identity to the extent of destroying historical neighborhoods. And this raises the fundamental question: what does it mean to be local? Alborde here has used wood for the structures sourced from the Sharjah Electrical, Water and Gas Authority, which has commenced the replacement of wooden utility poles with metal ones. The shades for the structure are composed from palm tree mats, widely available regionally and used in various ways. This approach results in a raw and tactile intervention, crafted with natural materials that allow for intimate discourse with the direct context. Globalization has caused us to scale down everything from our cultural preferences to aesthetic connotations with a focus on a northern center. We find a world where the monotony and the homogeneity of progress determines and sets the precedents that the global north and the global south follow. And this begs the question: what has been the trade-off for this prosperity? We must look at how the regions of the global south have dealt with the limitation of resources as a suggestion to combat our planet's natural capacity to neutralize pollution which has become dangerously unattainable. And what is wrong with our current global value system? What does our acknowledgement of progress negate the passive and naturally occurring? For example, our preference for clinically hard surfaces as opposed to the natural ground, or our obsession with air conditioning and plastic. After all, when these notions of progress and convenience are scaled, they significantly harm our natural environment. The cornucopian model is now unattainable. Using the Chinese ivory puzzle as a metaphor, the Industrial Revolution and subsequent Great Accelerator have propelled us all into an unnatural run on our natural resources and in direct conflict with ecological balance. It is essential to press that we must move beyond the acknowledgement of a wrong or an apology for the past from the north to the south, but a collective and constructive resolve for systemic change for the future. It is even more critical today to merge culture through context with nature, not as an option, but as a must. The Triennial exhibition does not aim to dictate solutions, but serves as a convergence to rethink optimistically our approach in the hope that history will judge us kindly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tosine, for this very concentrated presentation and for the many reminders that you're bringing to us. Are there any questions from the online audience or from the audience present here to Tosine? We have one very happy member in the audience here, Alborde, who is very thankful to you for having mentioned their participation in their project.
And they're brilliant projects, in fact.
Yeah, we're all waiting to see it. And apologies, Tosine, for saying Biennale. It's actually a Triennale. So
Yes, it is.
Well, I actually have a question. I mean, we started with Professor Jin's presentation on China's tradition, how that has been reinterpreted by numerous architects. And in fact, there are actually many, many more architects who have been motivated to look at the traditions of Chinese or garden architecture, as Professor Jin has pointed out. You raise a very current question about the external pressures that come from globalization, and these stretch from ideas about economy that have a financial basis and have a kind of a investment basis, and there are organizations such as IMF and so on who breathe down the necks of countries, and yet you end on a kind of very positive note, saying that we have to look at how we marry our needs with the needs of nature. With all these competing forces, I mean, you're very optimistic. I am much more skeptical about the possibilities and the options. What makes you so optimistic?
I'll be honest, I won't say I'm optimistic. I think I'm flagging the point that for several of these regions, they've worked with so little for so long, but they have still existed within modernity. In some cases, not always with the most convenience, which is the big difference between the North and the South. But when we are all dealing with this idea of austerity, it does really beg the question, maybe there's some lessons we can learn from what happens below the central line, the equator line. And I think that really is the point that I make. There's always been a convergence or concentration as a reference point of how things can be done. But why should there be only one solution? In many situations, a lot of the countries in the global south are not producing the pollution and the carbonization, which is ecologically throwing us off. And I really think that there needs to be a rethink about how we approach this and look at what's been happening in the global south. Because I think it's terribly unique and it's been staring us in plain sight. So I won't say it's an optimism, but I'm very aware that, especially growing up in Lagos, where many things didn't work. I'll give you an example. I'm sitting at home now and I don't have power, but I have solar and I have a battery system that has ensured that I can sit in this presentation and I don't have an outage. There are many ways to solve this problem, but we have consciously and constantly focused on technology as the only solution. If we think about pre-industrialization, a lot of our civilizations were in balance with ecology and the environment, and they still functioned. And that's why I ended also with this idea of what is the trade-off for this prosperity?
Yeah, I think it's a very sobering reminder. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? See, I think, let me just conclude this because we do have some time. We're actually on schedule. Not only is there, as Professor Jin has pointed out, there's been here in China, this enormous development at an urban and regional level that has produced a series of, or millions of buildings that are, of course, very rational, repetitive, that have created an environment of a certain degree of, on the one hand, robustness, but also on the other hand, a kind of a dreariness, which one has to admit. And this kind of development has happened in the United States and in Russia and in Europe. After the Second World War, we've seen lots of social housing projects all over the world that have followed the idea of modernism, the topic that we introduced at the beginning of this session. And yet, the interest that the Chinese architects have found or have developed in traditional Chinese architecture, the notion that somehow garden architecture or nature should be, as in your case, should be the calling, should be the basic, should be the matrix within which we should be developing individual architectural responses as well as the urban design responses, I think is an interesting call, is an interesting demand that I think, unfortunately, from my perspective, only very few architects and urban designers are following, because it's much easier to use the kind of rationalist model and then to put everything into an Excel equation and to put everything into building information modeling, and out comes the required investment return, right? So the dimension, the kind of humanist requirements, as well as the requirements that nature has, are sort of left off the equation, literally, and therefore all the kinds of reminders that we've had in these first two keynote lectures are sort of getting at global rationalism. And how you ended with the note on reminding us of pre-industrial cultures, how they actually made do. I am very skeptical that the level of comfort that the global north has reached has made the global north so lazy, so resistant to change. I see that in Germany, you know, the so-called progressive coalition is failing to convince the general public that the general public needs to change. And it's not a very large part of the global population. It's only 83 million, but still, you know, if so-called educated democracies are unable to change, who are we trying to convince?
Well, I'll be very honest, whether we like it or not, we are faced with this looming doom. Whether you like it, whether we like it or not, people do need to change. We can't continue on this trajectory. And I think it's change in all aspects of life, policy, governance, architects, how we live. I think ultimately, particularly for architects, our training so far, which is post-war, has very much been with the to design with the illusion of surplus. There is no surplus. We are sitting on a finite round ball. You know, we can't continue in a linear trajectory. And I think training has to consider this additional element of thinking, which involves responsibly thinking about not just using the buzzword sustainability, but consciously thinking about a more contextual approach to how we design. I mean, we're not going to solve any problems, you know, as just individuals. But I think, like I said, as a profession, I think if we have people who are currently in training, starting to think this way, then we are getting closer, or hopefully closer, to when they become practitioners. They have this as a tool that they design at default. My generation is almost lost, you know, when you think about those people who think in this way, it's not collective, but this needs to happen from the classroom.
Thank you, Josina. I think we've had a very interesting first two set of presentations. I think the scope of the task have been made very clear by Professor Jin, Chuyi, and yourself. It is both an understanding of the tradition of the local traditions and understanding what wealth there is in those, as well as understanding the potential of the local condition at the moment and to what extent we can derive value and innovation from that. And I think if I understand Alborda's project correctly, it reuses things that otherwise have been discarded and otherwise would be wasted in a productive and innovative way. And I think
what's really important about Alborde, they practice in South America, and this is a principle which they do all their work. And what was so great is to see how it's been so applicable in a completely different context. But in that context, they've used local materials that give it a local narrative and a locality, which I think is important. So they're a case to show that as a concept, this can work. If people think, as architects and designers, we think differently, we can start to produce more balanced architecture with our ecology.
Thank you, Tosin. I give the floor to the Dean. Please.
Hello, Tosin. This is Xiangning.
Hello.
I have a quick question for you because it's partially related to your presentation, but maybe not. But I wonder, can you give a little, more information about I'm interested in the situation of architectural education in Western Africa. This region, how for example, in your city, how kids are taught as architect, and what kind of impact of the so-called kind of vernacular or typology kind of thing have on the reflected in the system of architecture education there.
Thank you very much for your question. I have to say, I don't have a strong relationship with academia in my country, but as a practicing architect who employs and has students who come in and architects who've trained through the universities locally, I have to say there sadly is a big disconnect. There is an emphasis in teaching the traditional and then a separate emphasis in teaching the modern. And there isn't this union between the two. And so this criticism that I've made about education is also a big challenge where I'm from. So I have architects who come in through the university system who understand culture, but never relate it directly with their practice, because we very much are still, what I understand from what I've seen is a lot of the way that is taught is almost 1960s, 1970s Europe. There's an emphasis on creating big, again, this idea of working from surplus. And it's only pockets of individuals who are conscious of this outside of academia who imbibe it in their practice. So we also have this problem looming because we are educating a generation of designers who are not thinking in this context, even though they are surrounded by this very unique existence.
Okay, thank you, Tosin. I do hope that someday you could visit us. We can have a more discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And it's back to
Wilfred.
Thank you, Tosin. Thank you, everyone. We're going to now take a 10-minute interval break, and we will return at in 10 minutes at 7:30 Shanghai time. Yeah, I think I'm not going to translate it to the global system. So thank you, and see you soon in a few moments.
Hello, Wilfried.
Hello, Johanni.
Good to see you.
We'll see you in.
Hallo Wilfried. Spät dazugekommen und ein bisschen krank aufgewacht. Ich weiß noch nicht, was mit mir los ist, aber ich werde zumindest zuhören.
Wunderbar, Manuel. Bis später.
Ja, bis gleich.
Mariana, you are presenting on your own, is that right?
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, Luis had a internet
Okay,
connection
no
problem.
problem. As long as there's one person, I think this is fine. So I'd like to welcome all of you returning to the second part of this first session. And we have two papers before we conclude this first session with the keynote lecture from Professor Juhani Pallasmaa. The first of the two papers is given by Mariana Wilderom. She's based in Brazil, but at the moment she's actually in Europe, in the Netherlands. Mariana Wilderom is an architect and holds a master's and doctor's degree in architecture and urbanism. She's carrying out postdoctoral research at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Sao Paulo. She's an associated researcher at the Critical Thinking and Contemporary City Research Group at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Sao Paulo. She studies architecture theory and criticism, architecture and contemporary city in Latin America, urban design, and educational architecture. She's the author or co-author of the book Marcenaria Baraúna, Furniture as Architecture and Social Urbanism in Latin America. Welcome, Mariana Wilderom. Please, the floor is yours.
Let me share my screen. Do you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can see and hear you.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you, Wilfried, and I would like to begin with expressing my gratitude to the committee, university, and the entire conference team for this opportunity. It's truly an honor, especially I would like really to stress that it's really an honor. Well, unfortunately, Luis had an internet connection problem because he's traveling and thus he won't be able to join us. But here I am to represent our gratitude and joy at being here and presenting our essay called Building Bridges in Medellin that explores a critical analysis of the Antonio Derca School in Medellin, Colombia. I look forward to sharing its insights. So let's begin this journey. Well, Octavio Paz believed that poetry is a unique form of knowledge. It can uncover the mysteries of our world and even create new worlds through the revolutionary and liberating power of language. Henri Lefebvre, a thinker who never separated poetry from practical action, once pondered whether it's possible to create something that reveals and goes beyond the abstract economic structures in our complex and highly organized world, shaped by modern thought. Manfredo Tafuri, recognizing how capital directly defines land management, sets out a challenging text for architectural culture and criticism. It must find a way to work within the gaps and limitations of reality. So according to the perspectives of these three authors, it seems that changing the world depends on a unique ability to truly understand it. In the context of architectural work, this means recognizing and engaging with the totality of its own reality. By looking at this reality through a disciplinary lens, architecture can create a new reality that bridges the gap between the object and its surroundings, potentially producing an other urbanity. Achieving this isn't just about being accurate or having a comprehensive understanding of technical and programmatic aspects. It's not solely about being sensitive to social spatial phenomena, although that can certainly help. What's required is a different kind of knowledge, one with the potential to transform reality. The quest might have been the focus of Henri Lefebvre's intellectual journey as he looked for the key to changing the world in an emancipatory sense, both within the dialectical thought movement and in the process of making a kind of an inventory of the acquired experience, ultimately contributing to the emergence of new possibilities. So the Antonio Derca School project in Medellin, Colombia could be considered part of this kind of a Lefebvrean inventory, thanks to its ability to creatively unveil the contingent and fertile aspects of the reality. It critically embraces life's circumstances and the everyday spaces and practices through its own speciality. This in turn gives rise to a social and urban potential that transcends the conventional school typology. Well, the Antonio Derca School, designed by Obra Negra Arquitectos and completed in 2008, was constructed during Sergio Fajardo's term as mayor of Medellin, Colombia from 2004 to 2007. This project was a key part of a political agenda marked by strict timelines and the social expectations that emerged from his election. Furthermore, it faced the unique challenges of a region characterized by a significant social vulnerability. So the Santo Domingo Savios community, situated on the northeast slope of Medellin, faced all range of typical social spatial challenges that are common in a country whose history has been shaped by the long-standing impact of the violence of the historical process and specific afflicted the city as is worldwide known. Well, the school was part of an integrated urban project known as PUI, Proyecto Urbano Integral, for the Northeast, which encompassed various urban improvements, the construction of sports and cultural facilities, public spaces, and housing along the cable car line that is known as Metrocable. This was part of a political strategy that was to ensure that the new structures were physically open to the surroundings environment, serving as a symbolic spaces for the community. This was a significant departure from the previous isolation and closure of these public facilities. Sergio Fajardo's motto, lo más bello para los más humildes, the most beautiful for the humblest, was interpreted in diverse ways by the architects who responded to this call. We aim to highlight here the strategies employed in the design of Antonio Derca School building because of its spatial realization and construction as an alternative way to understand the relationship between architecture and cities, especially in high vulnerability contexts. The project stands out in the Latin American context for facing the severe social circumstances, violence, segregation, and poverty by emphasizing the urban qualities. The topographical imperative of Medellin's geography simultaneously intensifies the precariousness of spontaneous occupation and as well the landscape uniqueness. An uninterrupted awareness of what is close and what is distance allows that characterizes the city. The project initial move captures this dimension of the place, reverberating across all its levels, the program, the volumes, the materials. Thus, the project recreates the topography, expanding its social, spatial, and landscape possibilities the L-shaped volume accommodates itself below the street level, widening it. Starting from the sidewalk, a staircase with multiple landings provide access to its different levels, taking advantage of the steep slope. A strategy that perhaps only becomes evident through a detailed analysis of the project that unfolds in the proposal's structural logic. It builds spatiality through a rare physical and perceptual continuity. The threshold between the exterior and the interior extends from the street, continuing over the school's roof, which becomes a plaza, an observatory, an open space ready to embrace moments of the unexpected. Unlike other modern traditions, such as the hegemonic paradigm in Brazilian architecture, where the void is the appealing volume's negative, here the school's volume is preserved in its functionality, and it carries collective symbolism. Openness, fluidity, and continuity qualify a radical reality that in conventional terms would require immediate non-architectural interventions, such as fences, guardhouses, and barriers. The broad slab here, the extended threshold, is a clear boundary between the street and the school. Thus, this horizontal material boundary takes on an opposite meaning to the anti-urbanity of its vertical counterpart, I mean property walls. That is, it enhances what already exists with no didactic ruptures from the disciplinary tradition that separates form and everyday life. The school's spatial apprehension also breaks away from a passive contemplation. From a distance, an intrinsic condition of the city's geography, it presents itself affirmatively, architecturally. The school's volume and the steel-framed meeting room are clearly announced in the city skyline. They challenge the topography with a degree of freedom, making their presence known. Up close, temporality superimposes itself on volumetric stability, and corporealities apprehend the new space in ambiguous continuity. The meeting room, volume detached over pilotis, separates itself from the roof ground, becoming a local marker of the new building. It partially maintains volumetric unity on the approaching scale, with its functionality taking on new meanings along the way. It reinforces a sense of community and no commercial symbolism, delineating the nearby collectiveness, while allowing independent use apart from the rhythms of spatiality and strictly school-based routine. Its form in proeminence affirms the daily rhythms of this particular social group. This way, both project elements, the meeting room, the school, the plaza, and the schoolyard, and the different temporalities to which they respond, are demarcated in continuity. The interplay between individual and collective perceptions is emphasized by a continuous circulation between the neighborhood and the architectural complex. The sidewalks only widen when within the school area. The movement intrinsic to it follows the same scale and rhythm, from the descending access to the school via the staircase, reinforcing the connection between interior and exterior proximity without compromising its formal, functional, and social definition. Entering downwards aligns the project with the construction logic subject to housing needs. It subverts it by attributing a more liberated and beautiful character associated with the collective need. It elevates precarious access immediacy to the potential of group action freedom. Highlighting these aspects of the project, among many other possible interpretations, the aim here is to understand it from a specific critical perspective and to challenge it in its relationship with reality. In other words, questioning the strength of critical categories and their validity in the somewhat blurry urban and social contemporary context. Well, the Antonio Derca School is born in a rare material and perceptual continuity, considering the formal polarity between reality, guided by necessity, and the possibility brought into reality, guided by a logic that inevitably gives autonomy to the architectural moment of its process. So, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mariana. Are there any questions? Because I have one, of course. We have corresponded a little bit, and while I understand and fully agree with your overall assessment, especially as it relates to the contextual response, I think this is the most powerful dimension of the school. I have been wondering what the individual classrooms are like, because I think one thing is to talk about the school as an urban intervention and as a landscape intervention, as a way of integrating with the fabric. But the other thing is, of course, to also think about what contribution it makes in the didactic and the kind of educational theory of how schools are today places of learning, and how spaces are organized in that respect. So maybe you can just outline a little bit what you know, and let us know how the school performs as an educational institution.
Oh, it's such a wonderful question. Thank you for this, Wilfried. The only difficulty for me is to find just a way to answer this, because I think this school is really important. It has a very important symbolic meaning for this community. So we could address the symbolism, the symbolic aspects, giving the youth, this youth that is now accessing this new reality, new perspectives on their own lives. So this we could address this meaning, this architectural meaning of giving a different perspective, a different pride of your own land, of your own neighborhood, but as well in a very pragmatic architectural aspect. We could address the quality of the classrooms, because they have such a beautiful view. You have a really nice perspective when you are inside of the classroom. And this is a very important thing, because if you see the two existing schools that are on the both sides of the Antonio Derca school, they were like prisons. So it's really difficult to talk about a pedagogical approach on citizenship, a new pedagogical emancipating pedagogical approach, if you are inside a building that conveys the idea that you should be enclosed. So I think we can address this question in a very multiple and architectural aspects. So I think that's why the schools makes possible to discuss, to have several critical approaches as a built criticism.
Well, I think it's easy to see how it has a liberating effect on anybody who goes onto the platform and into the spaces and looking out. But we will be pursuing this in the further development of your paper before it goes into the book. So I look forward to working with you and with Luis on the development. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from here or from the participants in the online amongst the online audience? If not, then I'd like to thank you very much, and please pass our thanks to your colleague for this presentation. Thank you, Mariana, and we now move on to the second of the two presentation short papers. We welcome Ricardo Leitão from Porto, Portugal. Ricardo Leitão is an architect, and see whether I can. For some reason, I can't change this. Do I move?
Maybe who is the next? Maybe he should speak.
Ricardo, can you just say something? Maybe then we can
Yeah.
change.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes, Ricardo, I just wanted to introduce you very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilfried.
Ricardo graduated from the University of Porto, the Faculty of Architecture of the University of Porto in 2015, having attended under the Erasmus program the ENSA Paris Belleville. He's a guest professor at the Porto Academy since 2018, and he has been part of the organization of the Visiting Barragan program with the Barragan Foundation in Mexico City since 2019. In 2020, Ricardo was awarded a literary grant in poetry by the Ministry of Culture. In 2021, he joined the PhD program in architecture at the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Porto, with a scholarship awarded by the Foundation for Science and Technology, investigating a possible application of Harold Bloom's literary theory in the field of architecture. He's currently a visiting professor of history of modern architecture at the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Porto, and an integrated researcher at the center there within the research group, Theory and Project Practices. So welcome, Ricardo Leitão.
Thank you very much, Wilfried.
The floor is yours.
Before sharing my screen, I would like to thank the scientific committee of the International Conference on Architecture as Built Criticism, especially you, Wilfried, and I'd also like to express my gratitude to Professor Valerio Paulo Mosco for his valuable contributions to my paper as a mentor. I want, of course, to greet everyone participating in this roundtable discussion and our audience on this first day. I don't know if you can see my, yeah, I think it's working. I will try to do my best to stick to the time limit, but most importantly, I hope my presentation can contribute to our discussion today. I would like to start by showing you one of the best definitions of criticism I've come across recently. In a recent interview with Electra magazine, which, by the way, is one of the most relevant magazines on criticism in Portugal today, at least for me, the Italian literary critic Alfonso Berardinelli compared criticism to the endocrine system of a human being. And I can quote, "It's not heavily visible, but when it isn't working properly, all the other systems suffer. They become deformed, put on weight, shrink, lose balance." I would like to emphasize this idea, which I believe resonates across many, many fields. The body of any discipline is sentenced to death without criticism, especially self-criticism. My paper and presentation will focus on an architect namely Giorgio Grassi, who has precisely pursued this idea all his professional life, fighting very often in an obstinate way to keep this critical sense as sharp as possible. I'd like to stress that Grassi belongs to a group of few architects who write and draw with the same determination, showing a rigorous consistency in developing a theoretical discourse that is regularly tested and sometimes verified by their projects. During this process, Grassi constantly surrounded himself with voices that he felt preserved or pursued a certain ethics and rigor towards our discipline, with the aim that this influence and this specific word is very, very important. This influence would prevent him from deviating from the path he very early chose to follow. In 1973, the literary critic Harold Bloom wrote this book called The Anxiety of Influence, a Theory of Poetry, where he argued that poetic history is indistinguishable from poetic influence. One of the 6 revisionary ratios explored in his poetic theory was named by him with the Greek word kenosis, the act of emptying or decomposing something, which focus on a specific way of operating critically in opposition to a preceding influence. We believe the same can be more or less applied as a critical tool to architectural discourse. In a 1999 text called Altmeister, Old Masters, whose title he borrows from Thomas Bernard, Grassi proposes to evoke some characters that he has constantly observed with admiration, giving us an essential clue as to how the influence of these characters operates in his work. Firstly, he makes a clear distinction between the influence of 2 types of masters he identifies: the new ones, whom we choose, and the old ones, who impose themselves on us. Grassi warns us that he will not focus on his elected affinities, but fundamentally on voices that hover in an ancient and more distant world, on masters we did not even choose, but who are there in front of us, inevitable like their buildings, enforcing their presence, and above all, their model. His attitude towards architectures and architects, whom we called without distinction old masters, shows that if the same question was asked and perfectly answered in the past, our eyes should read carefully those models with the certainty that nothing can be repeated in the same way. The permanent confrontation with Alberti, whom Grassi considers one of the most challenging masters, if not the most, coincides with a virtual conflict with himself and everything that he always pursued in his work. His project for the new headquarters of the Casa di Risparmio di Firenze is an outstanding example of Grassi's ambition to confront both Alberti and the Roman architecture, that his way of building and its way of organizing the complex system that we call city, putting the Albertian lesson to the test. It is not a coincidence that one of the most notable works of Grassi's, who ideologically links himself to the left, is the headquarters of one of Italy's oldest and most important banking institutions. Perhaps the criticism begins precisely there, in the form of extreme Bernardian irony, and starts to build from within. The project for Casa di Risparmio in Novoli, which Grassi won in a competition in 2004, is based on his absolute necessity to settle scores with both Leon Crier's master plan for that area of Florence of 1994, and with, in Grassi's words, the unpredictable and megalomaniacal architectural object of Leonardo Ricci's Palace of Justice. But not only. The Florentine project highlights the inscription of his building complex in an opposite idea of the city, and by extension, society. It is also a project that we think Grassi would have considered ideal for building a direct critique of a certain idea of contemporaneity, bringing him directly closer to the masters who at one point did exactly the same, fighting to the last consequences to defend the character of their buildings. The shell building by J.J.P. Wood is the critical reference followed by Grassi, who openly declares that, at least for him, his Florentine project is the equivalent of Wood's controversial building. In common is that both buildings are associated with companies linked to capital, adopting a language, at least in their eyes, misunderstood by critics, mixing traces of classicism and modernism, and evoking a kind of a lost monumentality. Praising Peter Wood's courage and character, Grassi seems to formulate the proposal for his own critique also on the basis of a simple, almost ethical question. What does the character of a building really mean? He answers the question himself, clarifying that the character of a building is not determined by a form liberated from any connection or precedent, but precisely the opposite. There is the final form results from what we can call the character of a building, belonging to its complete expression as a project at the service of a collective idea of a city. In this sense, the permanent subliminal influence of Leon Battista Alberti is undeniable, starting with the Palazzo Rucellai, which shows absolute precision in its placement and in the expressive choice of materials it uses, in a logic similar to that followed by Grassi in his Florentine project. Grassi's project for Casa di Risparmio found itself facing an action plan that could only have been approached by precisely departing from the constraints of the city imposed by Crier's plan, which he openly criticized. In Grassi's words, a public use building obliged to be divided into several buildings to satisfy an equally extravagant idea of a garden city. End of quote. Nevertheless, he ended up following and poetically subverting the so-called Spinelli's variant of Crier's plan, exposing its incongruities, emphasizing them and seeing in them the primary expressive theme for his large brick building around a green courtyard. An example of this is the obliquely cut facades and the violent interruption of moldings and cornices in the breaks of the volumes that have allowed to enrich the relationships established within all the composition. The critique becomes even more evident when it encounters opponents as Ricci's building, the complete antithesis of what Grassi proposes. Here it is important to stress that Grassi's building has an even more significant impact when placed next to this strange neighbor, antithetically approaching what it signifies, since their dissonance is so evident that both can come close to the idea of a caricature of themselves. A paradox as the only way to combat another paradox. We think Grassi is perfectly aware of this, He's aware of it from the moment he realizes that he has to measure his extremely banal cardboard model scaled against the super sophisticated mock-up of all the other participants in this competition. When he writes that the model of a city sometimes becomes a parody of itself, he is conscious of what his own expressive choices can mean. The result is an architectural artifact unfolded into a triple continuous body with distinct internal and external facades extending along the entire perimeter of the area. A sort of miniature city that wants to measure up to the Florentine architectural tradition. The two sides of the same coin, one made of brick and the other of sandstone coating, contribute to the idea of a logical and hierarchical facade. By openly exposing the sections of his building, Grassi also highlights the formalist and ambitious nature of what had been imposed on him, hyperbolizing his critique to the point of opening up constructive sections in the built body in an almost didactic way. The use of the cornice, one of the peculiarities of this building, can perhaps be understood if we place it in comparison with Alberti or even with Booth. We can read it in the light of what Grassi himself considers to be the absolute necessity of tackling the problem of ornament in architecture. And this detail is clearly an allusion to the fact that sometimes it is necessary to take one step backwards to take two steps forward. Nevertheless, Grassi admits that he may have given in to over-enthusiasm by using such an unlikely and needless element. However, it seems logical, as it is ironically sincere, that his expressive choices in this project come close to what he himself considered a potential act of exaggeration regarding the theme of decoration in some of Alberti's Florentine works, namely Santa Maria Novella or the Rucellai Chapel. And I can finish, were they a gesture of impatience or were they the final unmasking? I think these are the questions. Thank you very much for everyone to your attention. Wilfried, I think you're...
Giorgio Grassi doesn't, thank you, Riccardo. Giorgio Grassi doesn't make it easy for us to like his architecture. I think that is a fair way of approaching this subject. I think there's a kind of an insistence on intellectual rigor that is quite dogmatic. I wonder, you spoke about Thomas Bernhard and the reference to the old masters. There are some old masters that become more mellow with age, and there's some masters that become more and more stubborn and bitter. I wonder where you place Giorgio Grassi.
Sorry, I don't know if I understand your question. And
I mean, you made very clear that Grassi's critique of the master plan made him, in a way, insist on this kind of clarity on the one hand, but the clarity on the one hand, which creates an order, also has repercussions on the other, right? Because it has a degree of repetition and uniformity, which the Bellini scheme obviously didn't have. So what makes this architecture enduring, more valuable than, say, something that is more superficially gestural and so on? What in your mind should qualify the building as something that has
I think I get. In a way, I think it's very, of course, it's very provocative in a way, but I'm not sure if the principal opponent, if I can say this, is the Leon Kriers master plan, or even I think maybe the Leonardo which is building represents an idea for Grassi, of course, of an architect that I think is the object of his critique. But I think I would like to tell you about a curious analogy that Grassi himself puts with a football player that I think explains very, very well his attitudes, at least in his building. Because Grassi himself tells us in his book, An Architect's Life, another title taken from him by a song by an Italian musician called A Midfielder's Life, that tells a story of the midfielder of Inter Milan football player. It is fully dedicated to this football player called Gabriele Oriali, who, although not a prodigious football star, had the recognition of all the fans for being a silent and tireless team worker. And Grassi writes something like, Gabriele Oriali was a player who doesn't have the hysterical tics and prima donna rages of all strikers, nor the obstinacy and even obtuseness required of a pure defender. A guy who shouldn't invent anything, but just apply schemes he knows from memory with intelligence and honesty, understanding how to be responsible for himself and for the team. This idea, a discreet but very useful player that is indispensable in difficult times. Although I'm describing a football player, I think you'll know what I mean. I think Grassi is trying to do an analogy with, of course, with the architect that he would like to be in his time, in a time which he doesn't recognize himself. A bit compared with Thomas Bernard, which I think, in my humble opinion, did the same in literature. Grassi continues saying this architect, this player and this architect is a professional type that has been in short supply for a long time and has become almost impossible to find nowadays, especially in our work. And this guy is more interested in architecture than in its own buildings. It is more interested in the fate of architecture than is in his own glory. I think is a guy who is particularly essential at times of crisis like the present, when almost everyone believes they are a superstar with a mission, as ungrateful as it is to this idea, which I think a lot of architects thinks is vital to renew our poor architecture. So I think the main critique of Grassi in his building, and Professor Valerio Paolo Mosco with his contributions to my paper told me about a very large idea of Baukunst, which I think Grassi is trying to apply directly here in this building. I don't know.
I think
Wilfried,
I think it's, you have made a very important point. And we can come back to that in our roundtable discussion after the
of course.
final
Thank you.
presentation, because I think it's quite fitting that we should end with the exposition of one of the most extraordinary and unusual and non-conventional, in a way, a building that we have come across in modern architecture, and that is the Villa Mairea. So thank you, Ricardo, for your presentation. And
I would like to greet also Professor Renate Stoens that I'm seeing here.
Thank you. So thank you, Ricardo, and let's move on to Juhani Pallasmaa. Juhani Pallasmaa is an extraordinary accomplished architect and writer. I will not try to summarize all his accomplishments and his achievements, except to say that he's one of the leading thinkers in architectural theory and criticism, and rightly has left a mark on the theoretical reflections that not in a dry way have gone through the kind of motions that many theorists have gone through before, but has tried to connect both the theoretical aspects with the sensual aspects, and something that a few theoreticians are happy to write about, or able to write about. And I think I will just leave it at that and give you the floor, Juhani. I will operate the slides for you. Perhaps you would like to start to speak, and then you will appear on the screen. But let me.
Am I on? Am I on?
You're on.
Am
Just
I on now?
Yeah, just a moment. Let me just. I need to open your presentation. So here's your presentation.
Thank you. Shall I start?
Please start.
Thank you. Good to meet you after a long time, Wilfried. Yes, I have given my talk the title, The Ethical Dimension, Inner Criticality in Architecture. And my first subtitle is Critical Construction. Constructing and criticism first appear as exclusive practices. Doesn't engagement in a building project imply an accepting and supportive position of the given task? Isn't the act of building always grounded in the positive attitude of acceptance and optimism, whereas the act of criticism implies questioning and critical distance? Doesn't design work imply insideness and criticism outsideness? As a consequence of the inherently positive and accepting nature of the building task, built criticism or critical building is an a priori attitude in relation to the conditions, aims, and explicit or inherent values and consequences of the building task, while verbal architectural criticism is an a posteriori action. In addition to the external after-the-fact criticism, there is a necessary internal ethical position of the architect in the process of design itself. This is the ethical function of architecture, to quote the title of the significant book of philosopher Carsten Harris, in the practice of architecture itself. The critical or ethical judgment also concerns the aesthetic and stylistic realms. This has usually concerned the truth of the architectural expression. Here, the categories of aesthetic and ethical interact or merge. As the Nobel laureate poet Joseph Brodsky suggests, quote, "We are aesthetic beings before we become ethical beings," unquote. The poet's suggestion of the primacy of the aesthetic criteria has gained new credibility during the past few years from the studies in the role of aesthetic values in mate selection among animals. An aesthetic choice seems to be part of the selective system of nature to the degree that bowerbirds have been found to use false perspective in order to strengthen the desired visual effect of his bower. The interweaving of the aesthetic and the ethical in architectural thinking is exemplified by a statement of the architect and engineer Auguste Perret, quote, "The builder who hides any part of the building frame abandons the only permissible and at the same time the most beautiful embellishment of architecture. The one who hides a load-bearing column makes a mistake. The one who builds a fake column commits a crime." End of Perret quote. This ethical principle is an example of criticism internalized as an architect's moral code. Projecting moral values on architecture may turn into a crude moral exaggeration, as in the case of Le Corbusier's manifesto on the implicit moral value of whiteness. Quote, "Whiteness is extremely moral. Let us assume that there would exist a decree that would require that all rooms in Paris must be whitewashed. I claim that this would be a really notable police measure and a tour de force of high morality, a sign of great people." End of Le Corbusier quote. This is a surprisingly naive statement by a truly great architect. My next subtitle is The Interplay of Aesthetic and Ethic. Major stylistic shifts in the development of architecture have usually also had an ethical or moral grounding. That is, stylistic or aesthetic choices have frequently been supported by moral argumentation, as in the case of Le Corbusier above. In 1849, John Ruskin was concerned that the emphasis on individual genius destroyed the continuous fabric of cities. Quote, "A day never passes without our hearing of our architects called upon to be original and to invent a new style." End of Ruskin quote. Adolf Loos published an influential declaration entitled Ornament and Crime in 1913, and even wrote against architectural invention and originality, and saw primary value in following tradition. Quote, "The best form is there already, and no one should be afraid of using it. Even if the basic idea for it came from someone else. Enough of geniuses and their originality. End of Loss, quote. In today's cities, where new buildings usually compete hysterically for visibility and recognition at the cost of environmental integrity, we can understand the early concerns of both Ruskin and Loss. Individual expressions have historically been harmonized by tradition and style, but the rejection of unifying style has led to the disappearance of unity. The evolution of modernity, the postmodern counter-movement, as well as the latest stylistic and individual artistic orientations have been supported by moral and ethical arguments. Postmodernism was criticized by the same arguments and accusations by supporters of open-ended modern expression. Alternative traditions is the next subtitle. In his book, entitled The Other Tradition of Modern Architecture, the Uncompleted Project of 1995, Colin St. John Wilson, educator and the architect of the British Library, one of the influential architectural writers of the end of last century, who had an ethical emphasis in his judgments and writings, presented Alvar Aalto, Hans Scharoun, Hugo Hering, and Frank Lloyd Wright as representatives of a contextually and psychologically oriented resistance within the modern movement. Wilson presents the work of these architects as a concrete built criticism or counter-movement in relation to the prevailing international style of the period. Hering and Scharoun did not actively take part in verbalized criticism, but in their frequent writings and lectures, Wright and Aalto explicitly presented their architecture as a critical and synthetic ideology against simplistic functionalism. Their built criticisms are indeed even more convincing than their writings. After having entered the functionalist ideology enthusiastically in the end of the 1920s, with the Turun Sanomat newspaper company office building, echoing contemporaneous works of Le Corbusier, Aalto produced one of the finest examples of functionalist design in the Paimio Sanatorium of 1927-33. Already in this project, he began to develop an alternative modernism by using softer, more integrated, and more complex qualities into his work, as exemplified a couple of years later by his Viipuri Library of 1927 and 35. By the mid-30s, he was already engaged in developing his contextually and historically grounded, environmentally conscious, and experientially and psychologically rooted multisensory architecture conceived for, quote, the little man, unquote, the anonymous user of buildings. Aalto was the architect who was most explicitly concerned in the experiential and emotive reality of the anonymous user. In the revised edition of his canonical presentation of modernism, entitled Space, Time, and Architecture, The Growth of a New Tradition, Siegfried Gideon presented Aalto as the hero of the emerging organicist approach and celebrates the echoes of nature in his work, both in his architecture and product design. Instead of accepting the prevailing techno-rationalist thinking, Aalto wanted to defend the little man against, quote, the violence of technology, unquote, which was an opposite attitude to the uncritical enthusiasm in technology. Next subtitle, Alvar Aalto's Extended Rationalism. Aalto was a rare architect who developed his criticality of the developing international style, both in his designs and writings. Quote, "It is not the rationalization itself that was wrong in the first and now past period of modern architecture. The wrongness lies in the fact that the rationalization has not gone deep enough. Instead of fighting rational mentality, the newest phase of modern architecture tries to project rational methods from the technical field out to the human and psychological fields. Technical functionalism is correct only if enlarged to cover even the psychophysical field. That is the only way to humanize architecture." End of quote. Aalto argued and continued his argument, quote, "My aim was to show that the real rationalism means dealing with all questions related to the object concerned, and to take a rational attitude also to demands that are often dismissed as vague issues of individual taste, but which are shown by more detailed analysis to be derived partly from neurophysiology and partly from psychology. Salvation can be achieved only on primarily via an extended concept of rationalism." I want to point out here that he mentions neuroscience and neurophysiology early on, because it has been expanding field in architectural thinking nowadays. Through his surprising book, Survival Through Design of 1954, Richard Neutra expanded architectural thinking to the new discipline of neuroscience. I found a letter of mid-1950s in Aalto's correspondence in which he acquired Neutra's address, but I have not found any indication that he would have contacted Neutra at that time. As a short remark, I had the possibility of meeting both Aalto and Neutra in Mexico City in 1963. Following Aalto's vision, the rational ground of understanding architecture has been meaningfully extended to neuroscience during the past couple of decades. And this interaction has been studied by the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, ANFA, as you certainly know, during the past 2 decades. Aalto's numerous projects, built and unbuilt, are concrete examples of built criticism against the prevailing reductive practices in architecture. Aalto himself emphasized the value of his built projects and even wrote that what he has written or said could well be forgotten. I will add here a quote from Aalto. Quote, "An architect is a man who has to deal with form and material, and what he says does not mean a damn thing. What counts is what he does. What I think of architecture, you can see in my work. And what I say you can just forget, unquote. He argued in a lecture at the Architectural Association in London in 1950. Also, his series of bent wood furniture arose from his sharp critique of the ergonomic hardness of metal tube furniture, fashionable among modernists. He made experiments in techniques of bending wood and developed a very extensive series of wood furniture for all purposes in homes, offices, and public buildings. There should be a couple of more images on his furniture. From 1935 onwards, Aalto's wood furniture was distributed by the Artek company in Helsinki. Aalto also demonstrated one of his favorite themes, quote, flexible standardization, unquote. Again, both verbally and through design ideas. One of his proposals, could you get to that one? 23 number.
Yeah, this is 23. This is 23.
I can't see it, but in any case, I intended this to be the idea of flexible stair, which is a singular prefabricated stair element that could be used for all riser width of step variations. It was never produced, but it's an interesting theoretical idea. My next chapter is entitled Villa Mairea, Aalto's demonstration of a new architecture. In the Villa Mairea, the second home for a wealthy and progressive art collector couple in the countryside of Noormarkku, Western Finland, Aalto finally developed a unique synthetic architecture which fuses nature and architecture, anonymous tradition and modernity, visuality and tactility, art and architecture in a uniquely sensory, sensuous, intimate, associative, and eroticized architecture. Siegfried Gideon, the ultimate spokesman and critic of modernism, who visited the newly finalized house, underlines the sensuality and intimacy of the house in his personal note, thank you note, in the Villa Mairea guest book. Quote, this is quote from the guest book. Dear Alvar, this is not a house.
Sorry to
this
interrupt.
is a love poem.
Yes, sir. Sorry to interrupt, but we can see these shared images.
I can't see them either. Wilfried,
Yes, sorry.
can you do something? We can't see the images.
Sorry. Apologies. I don't know what's happened.
We go to next slide
Let
and
me see.
show and just
Let me see.
just share
I apologize.
share screen and yes, share the PPT and go to play.
Yes,
Yes, can you
Yes.
see now?
yes, I can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
I just go back to the staircase.
Yes.
And
But that's an interesting idea of flexible standardization, which is, of course, a kind of paradoxical idea combining flexibility and standardization. Well, the next slide should be number 28. Yes. The Villa Mairea is an astonishingly rich tour de force of architectural and spatial composition, formal inventions, varied imagery, improvisations, detailing, and treatments of materials. As an example of the complexities, the prosaic structural reality of black painted steel columns on the ground floor is poetized by grouping them singly, doubly, or triply into a playful haptic and rhythmic articulation and tied by rattan bindings. Even structural elements can turn into images of poetic narrative, of theme and variation. Aalto's main assistant in the project, Paul Bernoulli, a Swiss architect, revealed to me that the construction work was almost finished when Aalto asked him to purchase an extra steel column, which was then placed in a skew angle underneath the studio. You see the diagonal column there. The motivation was clearly to complicate the reality of the structural reading without any structural meaning, real structural meaning, and give a push to the facade. This is Alvar Aalto's comment to Auguste Perret's moral rule. Practically all parts of the house have been elevated to an emotive and poetic role. The deliberate confusion of structural elements serves the purpose of emphasizing the continuity of spatial flow, abstracting and poetizing the structural elements beyond their prosaic load-bearing function. This architecture is in continuous dialogue or mirroring with the nature outdoors. The dense vertical grouping of wooden poles around the main stair in the living room effectively continues the accidental rhythms of the forest inside the house and projects an inviting image of a gazebo. The opposition of outdoors and indoors, object and context, are eliminated. Several details, such as the free-form indentation in the corner of the fireplace, appear as products of natural processes rather than human construction. It also definitely refers to the sculptures of Aalto's friend Hans Arp on the right-hand side. Aalto continues the idea of built ruins of the 19th century. Numerous sketches of the design process reveal the architect's desire to have creepers take over the house as a metaphor of time and ultimate power of nature over man-made constructions. Aalto was one of the architects of last century who continued the tradition of creating eroding built ruins, which was fashionable in the early 19th century. The overall experience of this building also resembles that of a walk in a forest, in which an immense number of stimuli and details are integrated into the embodied perception in movement. There is no given center point. The perceiver herself is the moving center of the experience, and the experience unfolds as an unbroken flow of observations and experiences, much as one would experience when walking through a forest. The next chapter is entitled Aalto's Artist Friends and the Art of Collage. Aalto was a friend of several of the continental masters of modern art: Fernand Léger, Hans Arp, Jos Braque, Konstantin Brancusi, Max Ernst, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, and Alexander Calder. Gideon makes a comment on Aalto's relationship with the arts. Unquote, quote, Aalto recognizes modern art as a great reservoir, which through often invisible, though often invisible, provides the decisive power for his own creativeness. In his project description of the Villa Mairea, Aalto himself refers to the inspiration that he has found in art. Quote, "It all began in art," unquote. He wrote in different contexts. Aalto himself painted all his life, although he did not want to have his paintings exhibited independently of his architectural work. I happened to make the first exhibition of Aalto's paintings in Villa Mairea in the early 80s. In his project description of the Villa Mairea, Aalto himself refers to the inspiration that he has found in art. Sorry, I'm repeating here. These are paintings by Huang Gris and Fernand Léger in the collection of Mayre Gulliksen, the lady of the house. In his compositional and emotive strategies, as well as numerous details, the Villa Mairea is close to the art of collage. It could even be described as a collection of architectural collages. The wooden gate behind the swimming pool is even a Duchampian ready-made. Aalto had the gate built in accordance with a sketch of traditional Swiss farm gate with a wooden locking mechanism from his Swiss assistants Paul Bernoulli's architect father's sketchbook. The collage idea, number 40 at this point, does not stop at visual details, as the Villa Mairea also includes an entire collaged scenes and material treatments from Finnish farm vernacular and, quite surprisingly, from classical Japanese architecture. The Japanese influence becomes understandable knowing that the Japanese ambassador to Finland and his wife in the 30s were intimate friends of the Aalto couple. And they donated several books on Japanese architecture to the architect couple, which are still in the former library of his office. Aalto never visited Japan, but he received his first-hand experiences in the Japanese tea house Tsuiki-tei, the House of the Promising Light, which was opened in the gardens of the Ethnographic Museum in Stockholm in 1935. And this building became a deep influence on many of the leading Nordic architects. All the great ones visited this Japanese tea house in Stockholm. Already 2 years before beginning to work on the Villa Mairea, Aalto spoke and wrote enthusiastically about the Japanese virtuosity in creating variety within limited materials and forms. As a curiosity, sometimes Aalto even wore a red-brown kimono in his office in the mornings. The kimono was a gift from the Japanese ambassador couple, but it shows affection to the Japanese culture. Bernoulli also testified to me that Aalto had brought Tetsuro Yoshida's Das Japanische Wohnhaus of 1935 to the office to be consulted in the design of the Villa Mairea, especially the flower room and the diminutive landscape feature next to the swimming pool. They are directly derived from this book, Yoshida's book. Whereas modernism generally aimed at a logical and unified elaboration of the main idea, Aalto deliberately creates discontinuities and fractures, and seems to shift into new keys and rhythms all the time. He keeps juxtaposing opposites such as romantic, rational, modernist, vernacular, novel, traditional, Western, Japanese, natural, man-made, free-form, geometric. Aalto suppresses logic and consistency of structure and articulation in order to evoke an air of adventure, poetic expectation, discovery, privacy, and secrecy. The Villa Mairea is subordinated into individual thematic entities in the same way as a play or a musical composition is divided into separate acts or movements. There are numerous late improvisations, such as the glass and wood modules between the ceiling and the top of the bookcases to close the library acoustically from the living room. Aalto questions the fundamental stylistic attitudes of modernity, such as clarity of gestalt, unambiguity, and the logic of thematic elaboration. He achieves this by creating impure collisions and juxtapositions, and by fusing items from different conceptual categories, such as fireplace and staircase. This should be, there should be an image of the combination of staircase and fireplace. Man-made and organic, modernistic and traditional, deviating from the predictable and stylistic orthodoxy, he rejects the self-evident and gains a world of freshness and surprise. In his own words, now you are going too far, go back to the floor plan, and even before. Yes, there, the cubist images. In his own words, the house has been an attempt to avoid artificial architectural rhythms in the building. Here he makes his intention very clear. Here the notion artificial seems to be parallel to forced and imply modernist tectonic, rational, and linear logic. My next subtitle, House and Guitar, the Mentality of Playing. The amoeba-shaped swimming pool of the Villa Mairea has usually been interpreted as a metaphor of a Finnish forest lake. No doubt, this is a pertinent reference for the image, as the Finnish landscape, lakes, and forests were important images in Aalto's work. His countless glass designs are also associated with the imagery of water. And as you probably remember, Aalto's Finland Pavilion at the New York World Fair in 1939, he had even a northern light, Aurora Borealis, as the image which he used in transferred to his architecture. But it is also related to the frequent appearance of the amoeba shape in contemporary art as a metaphor for the emancipation of art from its rigid rectangular frame and perspectival constructions. But it also has a female connotation, and it is reminiscent of the characteristic shape of the sound box of a string instrument, violin or guitar, in Cubist paintings and collages. The bowl shape of the swimming pool also echoes the negative nest shape in the corner of the fireplace opposite the pool across the courtyard, which also appears as a mold for a Jean Arp piece. The stringed instrument with its cupboard, can you take one more back? This one, yes. The stringed instrument with its soundboard, which became almost an obsession or fetish for the Cubists, also evokes an image of the female body. The still lifes by Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso from the mid-1920s repeatedly feature this instrument and association with the female body. A conspicuous detail in these images of stringed instruments is the representation of the strings as a set of straight lines. The overall plan image of the Villa Mairea, as you see in the plan, shows similarities to Cubist still lifes with a guitar, the extended roof of the sauna being the fingerboard and the pool its soundboard. Underneath the terrace roof, there is a puzzling set of 4 horizontal oval sectioned bars laboriously cast in concrete. As I asked about the function or meaning, Paul Bernoulli, his chief assistant in the work, laughingly replied, quote, "They are part of Alvar Aalto's play and poet's joy," unquote. Indeed, they can be seen as the strings of Aalto's guitar collage in his intellectual play with his Cubist friends in Paris. Here, Aalto also questions the usual seriousness of design and suggests a margin for play or even a joke. Next. Here is next one. The Calder. Yes, thank you. Here is a sculpture as a joke by Aalto's friend Alexander Calder, portrait of the architect made of some kitchen equipment. In fact, the strings cast in concrete had their origin, if you show the next one, yes, here, had their origin in the tensioned cables shown in Aalto's drawing dated 14th of April 1938, in which the entire terrace canopy is suspended from the corner of the service wings by a set of 4 steel cables. These real structural cables transformed into the metaphorical strings of a cubist guitar. The objective of this somewhat light-hearted paragraph of mine is to concretize Aalto's interest in play and his ties with continental modern art. In one of his later articles, Aalto wrote about the mentality of play. I'm quoting Aalto's expression, the mentality of play, as an essential element of design in our calculating and utilitarian age. Quote, not until architecture's structural elements, the forms logically derived from them, and our empirical knowledge are modified by what we seriously can call play or art, will we be proceeding in the right direction. Technology and economy must always be combined with life-enchanting charm. End of quote. Regrettably, since the days of Alvar Aalto, architecture has lost its invigorating interaction with art and the art of play. The distance or even separation of architecture and art today underlines the seriousness of Aalto's playful built critique. My last subtitle, The Role of Play in Design. In his most brilliant essay, The Trout and the Mountain Stream, Aalto reveals his use of subconscious sketches in his working process. Quote, when I designed the city library of Viipuri, I pursued the solution with the help of primitive sketches from some kind of fantastic mountain landscapes with cliffs lit up by suns in different positions. I gradually arrived at the concept for the library building. The childish sketches have only an indirect connection with the architectural conception, but they tied together the section and the plan with each other and created a kind of unity of horizontal and vertical structures. It is just an example of how my own instinctive belief has led me to the fact that architecture and art have a common source, which in certain sense is abstract, but which, despite this, is based on the knowledge and the data that we have stored in our subconscious. Again, in our time, architecture has turned entirely conscious and rational, but here Aalto celebrates play and the unconscious. Aalto's words on the Swedish architect Gunnar Asplund, his early idol, and Asplund's Skandia Cinema in Stockholm of 1923 in the image, apply directly to himself and the Villa Mairea. Quote, this is Alvar Aalto himself. I had the impression that this was an architecture where ordinary systems hadn't served as the parameters. Here the point of departure was man, with all the innumerable nuances of his emotional life and nature. Another architecture has arrived, which builds for man and essentially regards people as a social phenomenon, while at the same time taking science and research as the point of departure. But beyond that, a newer architecture has made its appearance, one that continues to employ the tools of the social sciences, but also includes the study of psychological problems. Quote, the unknown human in his totality. These quotation marks are Aalto's. The latter has proved that the art of architecture continues to have inexhaustible resources and means which flow directly from nature and the inexplicable reactions of human emotions. End of Aalto quote. Here, Aalto directly points at his own sources of imagination. And I have one more quote from Aalto. My aim was to show that real rationalism means dealing with all questions related to the object concerned, and to take a rational attitude also to demands that are often dismissed as vague issues of individual taste, but which are shown by more detailed analysis to be derived partly from neurophysiology and partly from psychology. Salvation can be reached only or primarily via an extended concept of rationalism. In my personal judgment, today architecture is in its deepest crisis since the emergence of modernity. Architecture is losing its cultural and artistic dimensions and societal authority, while turning increasingly into an uncritical, technical, economic, and manipulated, aestheticized service. Today, architecture again needs forceful, sincere, and independent criticism, built, unbuilt, as well as verbal. And we architects need to see our craft again, not as directly doing what we are being asked to, but as an autonomous, critical, and ethical practice. I wish to end my lecture with a quote from Alvar Aalto's essay, Humanizing of Architecture of 1940, the time that the Second World War had already begun. Quote, as opposed to the view according to which using established forms and making new ones uniform are the only path to architectural harmony and the successful control of construction technology, the purpose of everything I have said is to underline that variety and growth, reminiscent of natural organic life, are the very essence of architecture. I would like to say that this is ultimately the only true style in architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juhani Palasma. Your presentation, as I had already indicated, could not be any more opposite in terms of the content than the previous presentation by Ricardo Leitão. The one, the Albertian orthodoxy, and the other, the one searching for a humanist organicism. So In both cases, in fact, when all of the cases that we had presented today, we have different layers, different hierarchies of critical commentary. One in Tosin Oshinowa's review, from the point of view of how the North-South divide and how globalization is affecting and increasing poverty in areas of the world. And Jin Chuye's presentation of the Chinese, a group of Chinese architects trying to recover the inspiration from their garden architecture, to a radical proposal by an architect group in Colombia, elevating literally a building to a platform for public use. And then, as we had heard from Riccardo, the internal Italian, or the Italian criticism of a master plan by Leon Krier that was seeking to reform a 19th century city in part of a new area of Florence. Extreme positions, you could say, and the variety and the spectrum taken by these different architects, I think, shows how rich architectural criticism as a built form can be. I leave it at that brief summary, and I would like to open the discussion to the audience. Please raise your hands if you would like to ask a question of speakers. We have one here, Yasmin Sharif. Would you like to come and actually take the seat? Yeah, I think it's better because you're seen by other people.
Okay. Hello, Johanny.
Hello.
I was very surprised by the fact that your presentation doesn't mention Aini at all, and she was absolutely central to all the work that that office did. And you know, if you're talking about ethics, and we've gone through the Me Too movement, I really think that that record needs to be set straight.
I fully agree with you, but this was not about their entirely about the way that they worked in the office. This was about Alvar's thinking. Aino did not write anything. No, I fully agree with you. So I want to underline that I value Aino's work. Aino died before I even began to study architecture, but I became rather close friend with his second wife, Elisa.
Yeah, but both of his wives had a central role in the work that he did, and I think they should.
Well, you can. It's a bit too much to say that. How would I say, without mentioning in what way, in what ways. Central, yes, but often on psychological levels, keeping Aalto working and on the straight track, because he was.
No, I think that makes them very much like housewives. They weren't that. Aalto was busy.
They were. I do know. I do know.
Aalto was traveling the world.
Particularly in the case of Elisa, how much he took care of Alvar's.
Alvar. I don't know, but Aini certainly, you know, they worked together on the Finnish pavilion. They would not have made the world without both of them working together. And all I'm saying is that she wasn't mentioned once. So I just want to draw that to your attention, and maybe you can have a think about that. Because I think that, and also you showed the furniture of the of Paimio, and of course, you know, Aini was central to designing all of that furniture. So it's something that I think we should bring to people's attention. I mean, it was a lovely lecture, but I did feel that very strongly that this needs to be said in the context of architecture is so misogynistic that without having women acknowledged and participating fully, I think we will never have any hope of getting to where we need to get to in terms of our current situation. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Yasmin. I think we can reflect on that and chew on that. I think it's the recent architectural historiography has quite clearly shown that there are a diverse set of contributors to buildings in the 20th century, and it's not true that there weren't female architects in the early 20th century. And architectural historiography has a large area of work to do, so that I think we can acknowledge that. But let's, if we can, let's direct our focus onto the question of architecture as built criticism, and would be interesting to know what expression at all. I mean, you say that neither Einar nor Elisa wrote, but it would be interesting to know what kind of conversations they had within either the design teams or within the office or within the two partners at the time. And I don't know whether it's possible to find out which contribution either wives have had on Alva Aalto's thinking. So I don't know what kind of sources you could go to, if there are letters, if there are notes. That would be
well. The role of the wives has been studied fairly intensely during the past 15 years, and it's rather well known. I was, for many reasons, close enough to the work of the office in the last 10 or 12 years of Aalto's life. So I saw, witnessed what happened. I just want to repeat that was not the focus of my lecture.
Okay, let's have other comments or questions, please. You can raise the hands and then it shows up on the screen. Are there any other comments? Yeah, Şengül Gür, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, would you like to switch on your camera?
No, I would rather not. I'll just make a very brief comment. And I really enjoyed your presentation. It was a very elaborate one. I want to point out the fact that he's the only architect that I know of who, based on his legacy, is buried with his first wife. So I think he, in his own way, had a great thanks to the first wife. Just for a note. Thank you.
Thank you, Şengül. Any other comments or questions? Anna, I see you come on the screen.
Yes. Hello, Wilfried. Hello, Johanni. Hello, Ricardo. Hello, all the colleagues. So just to move a little bit from this, let's say, couple interaction. And by the way, I think that the Vila Maria, it's full of interaction, because the commanders, the couple, I would say that the lady, she was very, very active concerning the discussion of the commission and so on. I can't remember the name, Gulish something.
Maire Gulish, yeah.
Yes, but this is
He
not
was
my
a close friend of mine, and I did some reparation work, design at the Villa Maria at her request.
Yes, what I would like to say that,
Gulish family very well.
yes, and she was in fact as well very important for, I would say, the result of the project, because it was very intensive. I think the connection between the two couples, the architects, Aino and Alvar, and the commission couple. But my point, what I was really very happy to see, and in a way surprised, it's this relationship with the East, with Japan that you mentioned. I didn't realize till now that there was such an engagement of Alvar Aalto and perhaps Aino concerning the Japan culture, and you mentioned as well that he had the book from 35 from Tetsuro Yoshida, which is on the house and the garden, and I think this opened a completely more inspirational path for the Vila Maria, because I think we have all the idea that in a way it's a shift in the work of the couple, Alvaro and Aino, because they had the possibility to have a kind of a freedom and quite a large budget to make experimentation, and as well a fantastic, I would say, commissioners who were friends, and they found together the Artec and so on. I would like, if it's possible, if you could elaborate a little bit more on this in view of your last, let's say, conclusion, which is quite terrible, which is the situation where I would say architects and architecture is going through nowadays with this kind of commercialism and so on. And I thank you very much. It was very, very, very thrilling and amazing and inspiration, your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I have often said to my students that the patron saint for architecture is hope, and that is what we need. And I myself have all my life enjoyed arts very much, and whenever I have started the design work myself, I have practically never looked at works by other architects in the same tasks. I look at early Renaissance paintings, for instance, and this is what I try to activate in my teaching, is this interest in the arts, all the arts. Now architecture has become a kind of a technocratic profession in most countries. And the reason why there is some of the most inspiring architecture today comes from the so-called third world, for instance, bamboo constructions, is that there is still relative freedom within the limitations of lack of economic and technological possibilities, which leads to poetic, very poetic architecture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Xing Ran, you wanted to ask a question.
Hi.
Or
Yes, thank you, Wilfried. And thank you very much, Johanni, also for all the lectures today. I thoroughly enjoyed. I think my curiosity is add on about, hi, Anna, by the way, add on about Anna's question that I'm curious about what you think of the role of architects themselves in the construction of this idea of architecture and built criticism. For example, Alvar and Aalto couples, they wrote a lot, they talked about their buildings a lot, and they published a lot. Compared to those architects, say, for example, Sigurd Lawrence, he almost always keeping silent and then leaving his building and projects to be interpreted by the outside world, including critics. So what do you think of the role of the architects themselves in constructing this architecture as a built criticism? Thank you.
To whom are you directing this question?
Mostly from to Joanna, but I think it's probably broadly to the panel today, from the beginning.
Well, I think, Johanni, please.
Well, if I answer your question, I think that the main, why would I say, question is that we do each one what is natural to us to do, not to look for the same kind of role each one of us. I, for instance, have been writing since my fourth year in the architecture school, and I have written more than anyone else probably, or certainly in Finland on architecture. That just happens to me my way of relating to the world. I'm not recommending this to anyone else, but when I was dean of the school in Helsinki, the two first things that I did was to rent a workshop space in the city and equip it with the finest carpentry, etc. tools. And the second one was to start a philosophy course that gathered in my office. I'm not saying at all that every architect should study philosophy, but it is important that there are a few individuals who understand and can follow philosophical conversation. In the same way as it is important that there are a number of architects who are well versed in the arts, whatever they are, literature, music, whatever. So that is what we need, a multi, how would I say, a profession that is oriented to multiple directions, instead the kind of a service, technical service architect of today.
Thank you, Johanni. Maybe I can add to that before Patricia Mello has her question. I think you can look at a work of architecture or work of art as something that tries to express the creators or the team's idea about how we make a world, how we bring something into a world, and how, if the rest of all the other works were like that, how the world would be. It's a kind of a utopia within the building, right? So that there is this idea that some architects have, if only all the other buildings were like this, the world would be a better place. And if you project that thought to the work of Grassi, Grassi is trying to do, from his perspective, to give back to the world of architecture an idea of order that is, of course, very conventional and very classical, where Aalto is saying, you know, we have too much of that kind of rationalist stuff. We need to have more the presence of what humans need, the kind of psychological aspects and physiological things. And so we have, in this sense, a clash of two world orders, if you like. But I think the fascinating thing about Aalto is that in both the Villa Mairea and in the cultural center in Wolfsburg, the pinnacle of these buildings is the atelier, is a studio for the artist. And that expresses, I think, a value judgment on where civilization ought to be, or where civilization ought to place more emphasis. And that is in artistic expression, rather than in the acquisition of knowledge or the implication or the application of rationalism. Because the artistic expression and the exploration of artistic dimensions, those things are the things that liberate people. And if modernism, if the Enlightenment is anything worth having, then it is surely a strive towards the liberation of the mind, the liberation of the individual. And in this context, I think it is difficult to see how there is, I mean, we had in the world of fine arts, we had Cubism, and then we had Aux Enfants and Le Corbusier trying to put on the brakes with Purism, right? So we had, on the one hand, people trying to liberate the way of seeing things, and on the other hand, others trying to call people back to an order. So the notion of Purism was this attempt to put kind of a corset back onto Humpty Dumpty, who had fallen apart by this, the fracturing of the image, the fracturing of the figure into these multiple parts. And so we have these constant forces, if you like, between those who are seeking an order in conventions and those who are seeking to liberate themselves from those conventions. Patricia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the lecture. I'd like to ask to Professor Pallasmaa if for him is okay this statement, if he is agree with this statement by John Summerson, an essay that Summerson wrote in 1941, the mischievous analogy, where Summerson writes, we have our modern architecture, and it will soon not be modern architecture anymore, but simply architecture. The time has come when we can knock away the awkward fabric of analogy and study our architecture as a living thing, considering not whether we are filling in the history form correctly, not whether we are producing things to compare with the Parthenon or Chartres Cathedral, but whether the architecture we are making is or is not adding something to the experience of living. That is the only test that is worth anything. And I'd like to say, if for you, this statement can be valid for Aalto.
Well, I would answer perhaps in a different way. One of the sentences or thoughts of the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty that has impressed me most is when he says that we come to see not the work of art, we come to see the world according to the work. this is a superbly important idea, which has been so much lost in architecture. Architecture of all arts is the most relational art form, which should somehow express the world, somehow give order to the world, our experience of the world, to human culture, time, etc., etc. Architecture very often has turned too much into itself and forgotten its relational role. If I may leave it at this as a response to your question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maria Bernabei.
Hello. Did you listen? Yes.
Yes,
Are you listening? Okay. My question is for Professor Pallasmaa. Thank you for your presentation. Do you believe that Aalto's location made build criticism easier than being at the center of European architecture? Why mainly? For the materials, the form? Do you listen? And also, if other Finnish architects designed like him at that time, and if there was some common sense and how to build in Finland at the moment of Alvar Aalto, that was similar, like the way that he constructs.
Yeah, I think very clear questions, Juhani.
Yes, well, there were a number of architects of the age of Aalto who did superb work already in the 20s, 30s, and even after the war. Aalto was always the maestro in Finnish culture, but he was not alone. And also at the time that Aalto was the chairman of the Architects Association for 14 years, I remember, he was the unquestioned authority to present the architectural profession in the society and Finnish culture. And he did tremendous work in giving architects and architecture a high cultural role and value. But there hasn't been architects with the same influence or direction even after that, and that is why architecture has lost its autonomy and position in the society. We are considered minor engineers nowadays, and even in Helsinki, the art of city planning has almost died. Everything is just technical matters. It is important that we have figures like we had Alvar Aalto, who somehow radiated authority and made the life of all minor architects easier also.
Thank you, Juhani. I think we're closing in on the end of the first session. I would like to give anyone who really wants to ask a question or make a comment the opportunity to do so right now. So please speak, or I have Agnes Kouvelas from Athens.
Good evening, and thank you. I would like to say that Alvar Aalto could not be absent from a conference with this title, and I'm very happy about that. And I'm really happy that I heard a presentation on his work and way of thinking from Professor Pallasmaa. It gave me so many new thoughts and information. And also regarding the matter of the position of women in society or in architecture, I would like to say that I would like to hear the names of the wives if more collaborators of Aalto were to be mentioned, and not just because they were their wives, because a wife has a prominent position, so it is a kind of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Tosin Oshino. Thank you to Professor Jin Chuye and to Mariana Wilderom, Ricardo Leitão, and of course to Juhani Pallasmaa for their spirited presentations. I thoroughly enjoyed today's set, and I would like to invite you all back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Shanghai time.
Should we have a group photo? So
Yeah, and I think we have a suggestion. You want to have it here with a screen? There is a suggestion that we should have a big gallery, and we have a group photograph in front of the gallery. So let me just try and spread this image. And there are only a few on the gallery, but maybe we have those who are there. Please come and join. Please, yeah, take a seat. And if you would like, you could also stand behind me, because I have another camera, so there's more space. Come and sit. Come, and we take a final photograph. So we have a hungry audience because we are now at 20 to 9, and I think very few of us have had dinner. Greetings to Chile, to Portugal, to Brazil, to the Baltic states, and thank you. Thank you. See you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Shanghai time.
Hey, nice meeting you, Wilfried.
Bye-bye.
It would be nice to have a glass of wine with you, but we'll have it another time.
Yeah, another time. Bye.
Bye-bye.